Welcome to Sunday, week 8, and I think there's a game going on over in England right now, Chris. That is, its Halloween costume is a bad football game. Russell Wilson's been wearing a Halloween costume all season. Right now, it sounds like we're seeing. So this is our in-game update. The Travis Etienne offense being unveiled, and I think we're not going to get any questions about Travis Etienne going forward, as he's very much foundational to this offense, and maybe even changing this offense to be more balanced than it was with James Robinson, as strange as that is. And Russell Wilson's not good. And,
he didn't do enough high knees on the plane. Before he got over there.
There's something. We're doing start sits this morning, so I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole. But just the fact that all of us know about that is meanlet's meaningful. And they said he's icing his shoulder between series, which is not. That doesn't sound right. All right, let's say some things that hopefully can sound right for people, at least until we watch the games. By the I am Lions Cats in there. Let's just a little nod to Isaiah Likely. And yes, if Mark Andrews cannot play in week 9, we're looking at a game against New Orleans on Monday night. So you have to wait until Monday night to know if you can use Isaiah Likely, but he's going to be a waiver wire pickup this week. All right, start with Citron Physics. And again, the folks who are wonderful, loyal people who are here before we even start, we're going to get these questions first. And the tight end questions, Irv Smith going up against Arizona. And I can't run it down off the top of my head, but look, even the Carolina tight ends had 4 catches for 40 yards against Arizona.
Yes.
So that's a position that they forgot was pass eligible in that offense. Or TJ Hawkinson. We're still waiting for the liftoff. We had that one game against Seattle that looked like we'd gotten there, but not quite. Irv Smith or TJ Hawkinson?
I lean more towards Irv Smith in this game. Like, we're expecting this to be one of the more high-scoring matchups. I know both of them. I think Miami Detroit game is supposed to be like one of the highest scoring games, like for today, like 51, 52 points, somewhere in that range. But if we're looking at competition for targets this week, and also the projectable targets like for this week as well. I mean, we've got Amon-Ra back, Josh Reynolds healthy, DeAndre Swift not on the injury report as well. So it's just like Jared Goff, in his pass catchers. I mean, we do know that they're healthy, they're ready to go. So that, I don't know, the last time we saw Hawkinson do what he did, it was just born out of necessity more so than anything else. And we know that Irv Smith has had more of a constant role within that offense. So if you are looking for at least if you have more of a safer matchup, I think Irv is probably the safer of the two. But if you are leaning more towards upside, I can totally understand going with Hawkinson.
I think it's Irv Smith. Hawkinson, I think, is kind of like Kyle Pitts light in so much that he's not really an every week start, but we just can't come to accept it yet, partially because of that massive game he had against Seattle. What really struck me, Chris, is when Brock Wright caught the ball last week, people thought it was TJ Hawkinson.
Right, yeah.
Because 88 and 89, but also that just tells you that we're kind of used to Hawkinson being a sort of pedestrian weapon out there, even though he was the number 8 overall pick. And with all those other players back, it could open up more efficiency for Hawkinson, but I think you got it. The Arizona versus tight ends streak is something we're going to keep rolling the dice on. By the way, it'll be, I guess, Will Dissly next week. I don't know. All right, Elwood. Malik Willis is going to start. How aggressive are we going to get with Malik Willis? Malik Willis or Andy Dalton?
Well, isn't it Jameis Winston? Oh, no, not Jameis Winston. It's still an Andy. That's right.
Yeah, Andy's got the start.
Yeah, Andy's got the start. Against the Raiders? If I remember correctly, Raiders are bottom 3, bottom 4 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks so far this season. Even though they were able to at least keep a few teams in check so far. But I mean, unless you think that Willis is going to put up a Lamar Jackson type stat line on the ground, which is entirely possible given what we saw in the preseason. I do think that with Dalton, his connection and rapport with Chris Olave and what he's been able to do, Kamara looking good as well. I do think that Dalton's the better option over Willis, unless you're really trying to swing for the fences on this one.
Yeah, and then you could strike out. I think it's Dalton here. I would guess that Willis, it's going to be a highly conservative game plan against Houston. And I don't know if this was an omen or something, Chris, but they tried to hand the ball off to Malik Willis last week and he fumbled it. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. He might look a little bit like a deer in the headlights with his first NFL start, but it is Houston, so we'll see. Newly minted value for Tyler Boyd in your neck of the woods, or Amon-Ra St. Brown for Mr. Kev Murphy.
I still think it's Amon-Ra St. Brown, like in this one. I mean, from a ceiling standpoint, I know that Tyler Boyd has had like the big games like so far. And while I'm cautiously optimistic about the Bengals being able to weather the storm without Jamar Chase, we know where those targets are going, like when for Detroit at this point. I mean, we're not really expecting a ton like from the ancillary players, but Amon-Ra has had the higher like target share, when healthy. We do know this is going to be a game that they should be able to work the middle of the field anyway. Like even though Miami's like perimeter corners like haven't been at least outstanding over the past couple of weeks, injured for the most part, but still. But I do think that, I mean, if Amon-Ra is back, he's healthy, and even with the new concussion protocols, I mean, that's the reason why he wasn't able to come back to Week 7's game anyway. So I do think that if it's not a lingering injury concern from Week 7,
right,
it should be ARSB.
Yeah, if he had, it seems like all reports are that he wasn't actually concussed. It was the new concussion protocol. And the other thing we're looking at here with Amon-Ra St. Brown and DeAndre Swift, and Chris, this is just something we're going to watch closer because remember, I think it was when Jared Goff was against the Dolphins with the Rams that he was really unmasked. I want to say maybe it was a Monday night game. I don't know.
I remember that. Yeah.
Now Brian Flores isn't there anymore, but Josh Boyer is, and they just knew how to put him in a mindset that really didn't work for him. Now, that being said, Brian Johnson and Detroit has really given him a lot of layups with Amon-Ra St. Brown and helped him settle down. So we saw Detroit for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season look like one of the best, most rich environments for fantasy value. Then Amon-Ra St. Brown gets dinged. DeAndre Swift gets dinged, and they turn into one of the worst offenses in the league.
Yes.
I think this is a sign of how Jared Goff just can't really make anything on his own. He can harvest what's there, but he can't make anything on its own. Now, Miami, a middle of the road defense, but they can get pressure and they are willing to gamble. So we'll see what happens here because we want to know how much we can count on these Detroit players going forward, including Jared Goff, because quarterback is a wasteland. Quarterback is a wasteland now in fantasy football. Ryan Tressler, we're sticking with this Miami-Detroit game. We start with Raheem Mostert. Pick one in a PPR. Raheem Mostert, Adam Thielen, or Paris Campbell?
Mostert. I think if I was going to go anywhere, because we've seen him now completely take over the backfield, like render Chase Edmonds completely, I mean, irrelevant for fantasy purposes at this point. Also out there, like running routes. I caught a receiving touchdown in last week's game with Tua coming back. And I think he's the one with the quickest path to the most touches. I mean, like Thielen does have a good matchup, like in the middle of the field, like against Arizona. Paris Campbell, we saw him come on. I mean, last week too. We don't know what to expect with Sam Ellinger's like first start. So it's just, out of all of those three, like Mostert sticks out the easiest.
Yeah, and I think that the only hesitation folks have with Mostert right now is probably because of his injury history, because we just associate him with injuries. So, and there is a risk. I mean, that's not trivial. There is a risk you start him and on the first series he limps off and that's it. I mean, certainly we've seen that in previous years. But he's a clear lead back in a good offense in a good matchup. So I think this is pretty simple, and partially because the other options aren't that compelling. I wouldn't be surprised if Adam Thielen has a good game today because Byron Murphy shut down Devontae Adams earlier this year and forced Derek Carr to go to some of the secondary options. We'll see if Byron Murphy can do that against Justin Jefferson. Paris Campbell's interesting. I think Sam Ellinger is going to support one option. I just don't know if it's going to be Pittman or Campbell, and I don't know if it's going to be one of those things that changes depending on matchups or depending on who's hot. I wouldn't be surprised to see Campbell have another line like he did. I think was the game that Matt Ryan threw 58 passes, like 7 for 57 and a touchdown. I wouldn't be surprised to see that from Campbell today, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see him go 2 for 13 and Pittman have that kind of line. Just real quick, because I don't know if we're going to get any questions for super flex folks out there. Are you more inclined to say, let it roll with Sam Ellinger? Let's see what happens. He's a gamer, or say, let's like Malik Willis. Let's see what we've got here before we trust him in our lineup.
No, I think with Sam Ellinger, you at least have the supporting cast in order to give him a viable fantasy day in the super flex like type league. And then also with his ability to scramble, it at least gives the Indianapolis Colts offense to continue moving the ball down the field. Like whereas with Matt Ryan, we just saw sack after sack after sack. And so if Ellinger can use his legs to keep the ball moving, it might end up with like a Jonathan Taylor rushing touchdown, but at least the Colts can continue to accumulate yards, and at that point, like Sam Ellinger can wind up having a decent fantasy day.
Yeah, I agree with you when you bring up the point of surroundings, and that was just striking. It was striking for Frank Reich could have eased into this and said, well, Matt Ryan's hurt. We're going to give Sam Ellinger, see how he plays. But no, they're saying Ellinger's the starter for the rest of the year. This is a choice within a game, back to Superflex leagues, but also this is going to give us a chance to get to the FFWX, just as a larger question. But the more simple question here for Superflex for Ryan Tressler, Daniel Jones or Geno Smith playing each other head-to-head in Seattle?
If I had to lean one way or the other, Daniel Jones. I probably don't feel the greatest about that. I'm just leaning more towards the rushing production, like in that game. And I think that's the reason why I lean more towards that. I mean, I know from Adam Schefter reporting that DK Metcalf is supposed to be playing today. I mean, that dude is built different, as the kids say. Tyler Lockett with the oblique strain, if I'm remembering correctly, from a couple of days ago. I mean,
rib,
or just a litnny.
Some sort of midsection
something. Yeah, Dr. Gene, like, we're paging Dr. Gene.
In this area.
Yeah, in this general area. But I do think that with Geno Smith, like, playing well, I do think that Daniel Jones, with his rushing upside, 107 rushing yards like last week, if I'm remembering correctly. I mean, that at least just provides a little bit more upside, like, versus what we can expect out of just the banged up, like, wide receivers, like, for Seattle.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I definitely think that Jones has that upside. What's really refreshing with Jones is that the Giants are using his rushing ability as a tactical part of their attack.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. And that's what adds in that upside. And Geno Smith is probably a little bit of a safer play. Real quick, are you concerned about if somebody's saying, I've got Tyler Lockett and I've got someone from another game, or I've got Wan'Dale Robinson and someone from another game? Are you concerned about what looks like it's going to be typical Seattle weather, a lot of rain this afternoon?
Yes, yeah, to the FFWX portion of my Twitter handle. Yes, I am actually concerned about the rain for that specific purpose, not for the game environment, but for the guys that are nursing injuries right now. So they're projecting, this is me nerding out for a second, at least last I saw, 0.03, 0.04 inches per hour, which is like, if you looked at it, you're not even going to see it like on the actual like game broadcast or anything like that. But on the field itself, it does lend itself to slips, trips, some slides here and there, and also just like random events that we can't really predict, like fumbles, a tipped pass or an interception, things of that nature. So if we are looking at guys that are already dealing with injuries, like Wan'Dale, like, who is coming back from injury, actually, I think he like left for like a short series, like just last week. So it's just stuff like that you definitely have to pay attention for, and I'll definitely be keeping my eye out for it today.
For some reason, I'm just thinking, this we have our sleeper of the week, like, it's got a nice beat. It most makes me want to freestyle whenever it comes in. When you're saying slips, trips, things we can't predict. Let's do it, man.
Slip that one right in there.
Yeah. All right, Mel Johnson. And this one's complicated because of illnesses. It sounds like there's some sort of bug going around in the Cowboys team right now. Which two running backs in a half PPR league? Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, and he, what the report we got on Tony Pollard is he is flying with the team to Chicago for the game, and this is going to be he's well enough to play, kind of, or we saw something here where we're into that part of the season where illness, he's traveling with the team. He's at the game. The game's in Arlington. Sorry, but my point is, we got a report. It's almost like I wasn't worried about him in an illness, and now we get a report that makes me think, should I be worried about him?
Yeah.
But we've been waiting for this moment. So Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, Eno Benjamin, or Darrell Henderson have PPR, and we need 2 for Mel Johnson.
I'm still gonna go with Tony Pollard, like right out the gate. Yeah, I think that's
the classic fear of missing out play.
Yeah, I think we've been waiting for this for how many years now? We finally get it. I'll be that guy to say that, like, well, I don't want to miss this one. Like, I really don't. But out of that group, I think Ramondre Stevenson, like, sticks out the most as well. Like, with Darrell Henderson, I even remember hearing, like, Jordan Rodriguez, a great reporter, like, by the way.
Yes.
Like, she was mentioning the fact that while Darrell Henderson should be active, but he has been dealing with a sickness this entire week. Ronnie Rivers is supposed to be getting called up, and he should be playing today. But Ramondre Stevenson, just this past week, in whatever you want to call the Patriots, like, quarterback situation, Led the team in targets, if I'm remembering correctly. He had 8 targets like just this past week, even though running like 20 to 22 routes, somewhere in that range. So from even in a half PPR standpoint, we do know that what his split workload with Damian Harris, but we do know that if they wind up even getting behind or even just in a more competitive matchup, like he's going to be the one out there on third downs, like passing situations, things of that nature. So between those two, I go with Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, but totally understand like why like Eno Benjamin. I would definitely think consider Eno Benjamin as a third option.
Yeah, I think that Pollard is a slam dunk here, and we don't know how good he could be. I mean, this would be one of those games that we don't look back after this. And I do think it's Ramondre Stevenson as the second, although the Patriots-Jets game, and I got to go back and look up which one of my Twitter followers used this in a question. Rock fight. That game is going to be a rock fight, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's going to be throwing rocks at each other. They're not doing a lot of damage, and I think it's going to be a defensive game, a field position game, maybe a game decided by special teams. I love how you said whatever you call the Patriots quarterback situation, because you even have
so bizarre.
Well, you have Bill Belichick saying that's a hypothetical. No, it's not. You can answer. It's not hypothetical to say is he the starter when he's healthy. That's not hypothetical. That's actually a real world question.
And why would you say hypothetical about your first round quarterback? That's just I do not understand.
I think, Chris, I think maybe the 2021 quarterback class is, except for Trevor Lawrence, but it seems like cursed or something. I don't know. It's close as we get close to Halloween. What we want to know about Ramondre Stevenson is how much of what happened last week was Damian Harris is coming back from injury, game script, so Stevenson's a better passing down back, and how much is it? Maybe they just see what we all have seen, that Stevenson just has more juice. Stevenson has more to offer the offense, and obviously he has the trust of Belichick. Henderson's tough. I wouldn't be surprised if Kareem Hunt is a Los Angeles Ram in 48 hours. We're getting a report this morning that yes, now the Browns are willing to honor Kareem Hunt's trade request. Hunt's going to have an incremental pump up. And by the way, on that note, and tell me if you agree or disagree, get Hunt out of your lineup. Get him. Get him out of your lineup, because it's tomorrow night, and I'm not going to go ahead and
trade deadline's Tuesday
at 4 p.m.
But I agree with that.
I'm not going to I'm not going to hold on to Dearness Johnson and pivot to one of the other. I'm not going to pivot to Samaje P. Ryan as some sort of hedge or put Kareem Hunt in my flex. I'm just going to assume that rational personnel management comes into play here, and you don't risk. And then we're going to see with Houston and Tennessee, is that an afternoon game? I think it might be an afternoon game today with Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is another one to watch as one of the guys more likely to be traded. A lot of teams in the market for a wide receiver.
Said he might go back to Los Angeles.
Yeah, it could go back to the Rams. We'll see if Aaron Rodgers gets someone to throw to. Benjamin is a solid. So with Henderson, I just think we can see that they're going to cap him at 12 to 15 touches, no matter what. And they're going to seek to reinforce that backfield. And it's against the 49ers. I don't know if that game is going to be a rock fight, but it's definitely going to be a street fight, or a game that isn't going to see these offenses really take off. I don't expect that, although we will get to see more of Christian McCaffrey. Deebo Samuel's out for that one, by the way, folks, in case you don't know. Eno has some upside. We saw him last week look really good. Imagine if he had got the short yardage touchdown that Keontae Ingram had gotten. He would have been a week winner for you, and it is Arizona against Minnesota. James Conner's out for that one. All right, we get a chance to talk about Dante Foreman. Which running back two would you start, Dante Foreman or Darrell Henderson? And we just covered Henderson. So is Foreman... I'm going to test this one out on you. I love my references, Chris. I'm all about the references. The movie Awakenings with Robert De Niro, Robin Williams. The catatonic patients come back to life, and then a few weeks later they go back to being catatonic. Is that the Panthers' offense? Is that Dante Foreman, or are his fantasy prospects awake and in the lineup over Henderson?
I think for the entire offense, yes, I think that is more of an awakening type thing. But for Dante Foreman, I don't think so. I think there's enough there in order for us to be encouraged about it, because from a missed tackles force perspective, from an efficiency standpoint, even just the targets that he got, I mean, he was essentially what we had hoped that he would be. It's just that Chuba Hubbard, he showed out too. I mean, so I think for this week, against the Atlanta Falcons, I mean, we just saw what the Bengals did, just this back in week 7.
Right.
Not expecting the same output for PJ Walker, but at least there's enough there with AJ Terrell out. I I mean, any of the other secondary corners that Atlanta will be trotting out today for the Carolina Panthers to be able to move the ball at least relatively easily, like down the field. Now, will this continue throughout the rest of the season? No, absolutely not. I mean, other than they still have like one more matchup against Atlanta in like, I think in a couple of weeks, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are the types of matchups that you would want to at least have some hope for this offense or roster players like from Carolina, like against these types of matchups. But outside of this, I mean, Donta Foreman should be fine. And given the concerns that we just talked about with Darrell Henderson regarding the illness, I mean, just the general situation regarding their entire offense, I would lean more towards Foreman today.
I agree with that. And I think that part of it is Hubbard being out today. He didn't practice this week. Part of it is Atlanta, like you said. Carolina's going to be able to stick with the run. Arizona, what am I doing? AJ Terrell out. That's going to help DJ Moore, by the way. I don't know if we're going to get to any DJ Moore questions, but that gives you a little more nudge to play DJ Moore. And Foreman, also, just to point out, another one of the Achilles recovery running back crew, Justice Hill, James Robinson. We're seeing not necessarily the death knell, but yeah, I think it's Foreman over Henderson. And we'll see. My theory on Carolina's offense coming back to life last week, Chris, teams get up to beat Tom Brady.
That is true.
Brady. Yeah, they really want to beat Tom Brady, especially divisional rivals. So we'll see. Divisional rival won this one. Adam P. Scary Terry. That's perfect for Halloween. Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel, and he's starting Brian Robinson at flex. He has Robert Woods and Marquise Goodwin. Little appeal, Marquise Goodwin being taken away with the weather, and TK Metcalf like Atlanta can pick up. P. Ryan or Shakir, and I highlight this question just because I want to highlight. Well, I think both of these are savvy pickups, and I would actually drop Robert Woods and Marquise Goodwin, who I think aren't going to change your season, for both P. Ryan and Shakir, who I think have the potential to change your season. Did you have your P. Ryan, Shakir, or really I can just throw this open. This is kind of more of an on the couch kind of question, Chris, but anybody because we're partway through the bye week gauntlet now, right? We're 3 weeks into the bye week gauntlet. Now next week we're gonna have 6 teams on bye, so it gets a little bit tighter next week, but you're starting to see some of your players buys. We had a rough bye week in week 7, right? Week 6, I think it was like so many great offenses. Now P. Ryan, Shakir, or any other names that you're slipping in bottom of your bench because not someone to help you getting through the bye weeks in terms of filling in your lineup, but somebody like a Shakir, like a P. Ryan that you want to add for potential future value, or we can talk about P. Ryan or Shakir because there's stuff to talk about with all these guys.
Yeah, either one of those two I think are definitely fine, just given that we know that with Cincinnati's like pass rate over expectation and just P. Ryan's like usage on like third down and obvious passing situations, they're going to have to work in like some of their extra guys, whether it's Mike Thomas or like whomever. Shakir is fine like as well. Another guy I like to talk about who just got activated today, what about Van Jefferson? I mean, we do know that the Rams, like they need like some other level of explosiveness like on the offense, and with Allen Robinson not really providing that, I mean, it does at least lend itself more towards like Van Jefferson becoming a larger part of the offense sooner rather than later. Now, Van Jefferson, like he's typically run more of the intermediate and deep routes, and with the offensive line for the Rams like being at least something of a detriment or like a weakness for them. So Matt Stafford might not be able to, slide up in the pocket and hit some of those larger or downfield routes. But if they can turn him into more of an intermediate guy, a guy that can provide at least some coverage attention, like for Cooper Kupp, I think he should be able to take over that passing core like sooner rather than later. So I do think Van Jefferson is a guy I want to stash for right now.
Yeah, the Rams offense, what we want to see coming out of the bye is, have they gotten some offensive line issues together? I think Brian Allen might be back. And this is a good test because the 49ers generally thwart what Sean McVay wants to be able to do. Now, 49ers defense has their own injury issues, but it's just something to think about. And sometimes it's that pickup you make 15 minutes before game time when you know you're not going to need somebody. But P. Ryan, some of the other backup running backs I highlighted this week in the waiver wire column, Dontrell Hilliard and Zamir White, just because these teams are willing to run Henry and Jacobs into the ground. Eventually it's going to catch up with them. And especially with White, the Raiders are running the ball really well. Okay. And K1 says, holy, sorry, Joe, the Broncos stink. Sorry, Joe, of course, we spontaneously, accidentally, an idea came up, Chris, of Sorry Joe Plus. It's going to be our new streaming service where it's all the Sorry Joe takes. Sorry, Broncos fans. Really sorry. Okay, Barry Hickethier, 6 points for a pass touchdown, which does change the calculus a little bit on, and 1 point for 20 rushing yards. So these things maybe incline us in the same game. Kirk Cousins or Kyler Murray?
Ooh, so only one. Okay, instead of 1 point for 10 rushing yards.
Right.
Ooh, so well, I think I still lean Kyler, like in this matchup. I mean, like Vance Joseph, for some reason, he's been able to dial up blitzes at just the right time. Like he's not a complete madman when it just like absolutely just sent the house. But against a guy like Kirk Cousins, who can be, I don't know, you can fry his computer a little bit if you send like the right amount of pressure. So I guess against Arizona's front, I would give this like to Kyler comparatively.
I think Kyler, again, I get back to some fear of missing out, right? Kyler Murray, and Minnesota's defense isn't that scary. So Kyler Murray can give us a game, even with a point for 20 rushing yards, even with 6 points for passing touchdowns, which favors Cousins a little bit just because you harness the power of Jefferson and Thielen and Irv Smith. Kyler can give us one of those week-winning games. This one could actually turn into a high-scoring game. We'll see. And Derry Berry, I was going to talk about Miami's offense. Tua or Daniel Jones?
Tua, but I'm not 100% sure about it, because we at least saw once he came back. I mean, from a passing standpoint, a passing rate standpoint, I mean, all that stuff was there. Like it was connecting with Hills, connecting with Waddles, connecting with Gesicki. I mean, Raheem Mostert, like we were talking about earlier. But it's just the timing was off. Like we saw, what was the tweet that I saw last week? I think it might have been from Ben Solak, that if the Steelers DBs had hands, like there would have been at least like 4 to 5 picks like last week. I mean, at least. So I do wonder though if there's a little bit of rust that needs to get knocked off like over this week in order to get things back on track, like for the Miami passing game. If that's back, absolutely, like to a top 12 at least, like very much so in the range of outcomes for Tua. So I think that's my only concern. That's why I lean him more so than Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I still believe in the Miami offense, but you're right. It was a little bit of a choppy game in his first game back. 16 points in the first half, 0 in the second half. The Steelers' defense, not exactly a pushover, but not exactly a big limiting factor for opposing passing games at this point. A lot of players injured in their secondary. The Detroit matchup, I think, is what really tilts this. Let's give Tua the shot here. Yeah. And again, in the background of all these things, we're still fact-finding for how we're going to project matchups, how much we can trust players, units, teams going forward. And for the first 3 weeks, boy, it looked like Miami was going to be, well, the first 2 weeks, and they faced Buffalo, then Tua got hurt, then Teddy got hurt, Tua came back, and they were modestly successful last week. If this is going to be a fantasy offense, it's really going to, and we're talking about Mostert, like you said, Gesicki, if he's not traded by Tuesday. Right, so a lot of players implicated here as we watch, and some of that is the quality of Tua's play and whether he gets back in sync. MSH asks half-point PPR flex spot. And he's got the steal your face Washington logo there. Brian Robinson, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, or AJ Dillon in a half PPR point question here. And there's not a clear answer that jumps out at you first time through.
No, not really. I guess if I had to pick any of them, if I want to bet on talent, I mean, I would go with Deontay Johnson. I mean, I do think that while the corners for, let's see, Pittsburgh is, wait, who's Pittsburgh?
Darius Slay. They're playing
that's right.
The Eagles.
The Eagles. That's right. But he has like worked into the slot like a bit more so like than George Pickens. So it does provide him with a little bit easier sledding, like because they've got this afternoon game, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So at least that should provide him with a little bit more easier time like for his matchup today. Whereas George Pickens, he'll see James Bradbury, he'll see Darius Slay. With Brian Robinson and like AJ Dillon, I mean, both their offenses seem to be stuck in the mud at this point. I mean, the only thing that I would give at least a slight lean more towards AJ Dillon is because Alan Lazard's going to be out, so there could be some more targets heading his way. But other than that, I mean, Deontay Johnson's at least the easiest one to pick out of that group.
Deontay Johnson. So here's how I would frame the answer to this question, Chris. If you want to just take your safe 6 to 8 points and go home, Deontay Johnson's going to give you that. He's going to give you 5 catches for 42 yards or something like that. I mean, it's possible because of this game, because the Eagles could easily be ahead by 2 or 3 scores at the half, he might even give you 9 catches for 79 yards or something like that. I think poor Kenny Pickett. I made a joke whenever Kenny Pickett was installed as a Steelers starting quarterback, going back to South Park. Oh no, we killed Kenny. Because he's facing all of these really tough defenses. And he doesn't have any back down in him. So you're right, Pickens, I think the outside corner, I mean, Pickens could always hit on one pass. I mean, the case for Pickens is it just takes one pass, and Pickens, even against a Darius Slay, even against a James Bradbury, can make it happen. AJ Dillon, I'm almost scarred. I'm recommending AJ Dillon way too often this year because I think this is going to be the week the Packers go back to him. This is going to be the week the Packers, it gets Buffalo. You keep Josh Allen on the sidelines. This is the week you establish the run. They got the offensive line combination from last week. At least there's some continuity going forward now that they have 4 out of 5 guys in different spots.
Right.
But so many times I've hurt myself, Chris, by putting in AJ Dillon thinking this is going to be the week. I think it's almost like by process of elimination, you go with Brian Robinson here, and you go with Brian Robinson because Indianapolis has a quarterback in his first NFL start. Washington should be able to have a game script that allows them to do what they want to do. And what they want to do is run the ball with Brian Robinson like 20 times. And you just need that touchdown. You just need that short rushing touchdown from him. And I think that makes him the best play here. So I'm going with Brian Robinson, but we'll see. It's the Carson Wentz Bowl, and Carson Wentz didn't show up.
And also, I guess to your point, I mean, haven't teams been calling about Antonio Gibson as well? So if there's a chance that his workload might be reduced as well. I mean, it's like the smallest of narratives to kind of toss in that phase.
Well, and that just highlights how close these options are, which really means trust your gut because there's not a clear option. A couple ones I'm not going to highlight here. Just to talk a little bit about Dak Prescott and the Dallas offense, Dak or Daniel Jones. I know we like, so Daniel Jones gives us that wide range of outcomes. Dak Prescott may be a smaller, narrower range of outcomes, but a higher floor.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I mean, we saw at least I was hoping for, play action was still there, but I was hoping for a bit more like easier concepts for Dak, like almost kind of the same things that they were doing for Cooper Rush in order to make the offense like seem a bit more of a seamless transition to go back to their primary starter. I didn't see enough of that, but I mean, I would say that though, with CeeDee Lamb like still being at least a decent part of the offense right now, I'm hoping to see more of Michael Gallup this week. I'm just hoping for the entire offense to get back, almost like the Tua thing. Yeah. Because we just saw that there was a little bit of rust that Dak needed to knock off as well, like on his first week back. So hopefully we'll see a bit more this week.
Yeah, we were hoping for, because it was the Detroit Lions matchup, a little bit more of an offensive outburst for Dallas, but not so much. More of a broad question here. We got about 10 minutes left. I'm glad we get to touch on. We didn't really drill down on Michael Carter. David Meyer wants to know just thoughts on Michael Carter moving forward, and I can cast that as this. Chris, like, you think you're more inclined if Michael Carter comes up in a question today to say, yeah, roll him out in the Brock fight against the Patriots, always bad feeling, bad blood. Michael Carter is probably with Zach Wilson, like he should be his favorite target because that's what he's actually capable of doing. Or is this one of those situations where there was a small window when we thought Michael Carter was going to be a lead back? That window closed, and now we just have to wait and see because without Breece Hall, without their best offensive lineman, Elijah Tucker, this offense is going to be stuck in the driveway.
Yeah, I think you framed it right in that with him being paired with Zach Wilson, we know that at least as of right now, like the Patriots like front hasn't been very forgiving, but also with what Kyle Duggar is expected to be out like this week as well. So it just at least provides a bit more, I don't know, ease for a guy like Michael Carter to be able to make some of those like misses in the open field if he were to get there. So if we already know that he is like one of their not primary, but at least a good pass catching back, then I would say that, yeah, like you said, if he's on your roster, you don't really have like too many other better options. Tossing him out there isn't the worst of ideas.
We're going to see, and James Robinson might not be active. We're going to wait and see on that. But I think you're going to see this turn into a 3-headed backfield in an offense that's just not going to be very good. So we're, for a brief moment, we thought, well, hey, Michael Carter's going to get at least 5 or 6 catches a game as the lead back, and he's going to be good. Now a 3-headed backfield, and we'll see about Zach Wilson. I'm going to, just to conserve time, and I don't want, you can correct me, but Brian Fisher wants to know, he wants 3 out of these 5 running backs in a PPR. Aaron Jones in. Aaron Jones should catch 10 passes tonight against Buffalo. Tony Pollard in. We talked about that. So it really comes down to DeAndre Swift, who Dr. Gene has warned us, hey, DeAndre Swift might get only 8 to 12 touches now. 8 to 12 DeAndre Swift touches could be 150 total yards.
Yeah.
Miles Sanders has settled in as a nice 15 to 20 touch running back in a good offense. Or Raheem Mostert, who we talked about maybe deserves more respect, and we're still thinking too much looking backwards at his injuries. So really, to me, this comes down to Swift, Mostert, or Sanders. Tell me if you agree with that framing and who you pick.
Yeah, I think it comes down to those three. Yeah, like deferring to Dr. Gene on that one, I would still lean like Swift for the upside. But then if you're just looking for just like the floor of touches afterwards, I would go for Raheem Mostert. And then if you just want to completely go off the rails, I mean, then the Miles Sanders, just given the offensive environment. I mean, given what we know the Eagles are trying to do in the second half, like once they build up a lead, try and establish the run like shortly thereafter, and that would lean more towards Miles Sanders touches. So I would go like Swift, close second, Mostert, and then Sanders.
I think you're right. Swift is your upside play. Mostert is your safer play. And the Detroit matchup helps me. I would lean Mostert, but when you have Jones and Pollard as your 1 and 2, probably doesn't matter. Waffles. It's a Sunday morning. Waffles are always good, even though he has pancakes in his avatar. Hunter Renfrow down here in New Orleans. I love, by the way, one of the fun things about living in New Orleans is when people get the schedule, Chris, and they because I told you about the Geno Atkins jersey that I saw.
Oh
when
yeah,
the Bengals were here.
Yeah,
So the traveling contingent, because everybody, if you take a road trip for your team, make it New Orleans. Just wait for the schedule. I love seeing all the Raiders folks down here this week in New Orleans. Hunter Renfrow, Brandon Cooks, or Wan'Dale Robinson in a PPR.
Brandon Cooks. I think he's the one that sticks out the most to me. Like Wan'Dale's like a close second behind there, just for competition for targets, like in that offense. I know that his snaps, targets have all increased over the past few weeks as he's come back from injury. So I don't have much of a issue there, especially in a PPR format, like what Waffles is saying there. No problems there. But Nico Collins, like dealing with was a groin. I heard like Achilles, like what was it last week? May or may not play. I heard doubtful, if I'm remembering right. So given the projectable targets for Brandon Cooks, I think he's the easiest one out of that group. Unless we hear more from, is Darren Waller supposed to play today? I haven't heard
he's supposed
game
to
time.
Play. Yeah, but Darren Waller's another one, I think, and maybe I'm projecting. Maybe this is just me putting my own psychology out there as if it's everyone's psychology. But expectations,
you're putting yourself on the couch
always, every day. I mean, every moment of every day. That's I get free therapy from everybody all the time. Look, we had our expectations for Darren Waller going into the season, and maybe we're holding on to those expectations a little bit too long, especially because this team is happy to give Josh Jacobs 30 touches, and then on the majority of other plays, Devontae Adams is going to be your number one target,
or Mac Hollins, like popping
or
up
Mac
for,
Hollins, or Hunter Renfrow, or Foster Moreau. So that's. I
think Cooks is the best of those three.
Yeah, the only danger with Cooks, and let's keep your ear to the ground on this, is whether Cooks would sit for this game because they're planning on trading him. Because Brandon Cooks is not the kind of player you have to showcase. Teams know what they're going to get if they get Brandon Cooks. You don't have to show him off. We'll see. This one I think is interesting just because it gets into the question of a super flex, and something we don't ponder very often is sometimes are the quarterback options so low that you consider actual running back wide receiver in your super flex spot. Sam Ehlinger in a 0.5 PPR, or Brandon Ayuk for Chief Matt.
Oh, okay. So that actually does make some sense in that case. I think I would still lean Sam Ehlinger. Just I don't know. Maybe that's from a process standpoint. I would say, if you got a quarterback, you put a quarterback in a super flex spot. But like we were talking beforehand, and especially going up against the Commanders, they have been able to generate some pressure up front, but their secondary play has been abysmal throughout the entirety of the season. I think they're bottom 6, bottom 8 in success rate, passing success rate allowed, and also like EPA allowed, like EPA per drop back allowed. So they can be had from the secondary position. And if Ellinger's legs can keep the ball moving, then I do think that Ehlinger at least has a chance to be a viable fantasy option, at least for this week against the Commanders. So I would lean more towards Ayuk, or no, to take that back. I would lean more towards Ehlinger over Ayuk, like in week 8.
Yeah, I think that's the right call. And I could easily picture if this was a PPR question instead of half PPR.
Yep.
And if Ayuk wasn't facing the Rams, i.e. Jalen Ramsey, without Deebo Samuel. So it makes it a little bit easier to project Ramsey on Ayuk, then I think you have more of a case. And I would say for a larger point, if it's Sam Ellinger or Malik Willis or PJ Walker, there's so many of them now, right? We're in week 8. So there are some quarterbacks. Usually I'd say start the quarterback. Come on. But there are some quarterbacks that it would make sense. Let's just say if your flex position player is projected for a 12 to 15 point game, that might be a better bet than going with some of these quarterbacks. All right. Rounding it out. Well, just because we only have 5 minutes left, real quick, Chris, any other weather games on the horizon, or is Seattle really the only game we had a concern with today?
No, that was the only one that had a concern. I think the winds were up like earlier, like when I checked a couple of days ago, it's like 15, 16 mile per hour winds, but that's not really, that's not a massive concern at all. It was more just the rain, which I think should be at least controlled. But again, it just comes down to like those types like fumbles, interceptions, like stuff like that, which we can't really predict.
Yeah, I think we're going to get to the weather game soon enough. I think they're forecasting a colder than usual winter in the north, not so much down here in the southern U.S.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah, it's the Great Lakes teams especially.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get a couple more questions in here. We've talked a lot about Raheem Mostert already, but I thought this question was interesting because it had Nuke Hopkins, man, my brain. The Nelsons, Andy and Renee Nelson. Raheem, start tuning of PPR. Raheem Mostert, T. Higgins, Nuke Hopkins. It's currently had Mostert Higgins in, and I might be recommending something different. What about you?
I would get, well, I mean, I'll always recommend Higgins.
Tell me if this is controversial. With Chase out, Higgins now has the same value as Chase.
Yes. I mean, we were arguing for something similar throughout the entire offseason when both of them were healthy. I mean, it wasn't really much of a surprise that there wasn't a massive ADP difference. I mean, well, between first round and second round, that is quite a big gap, but just like that 12 pick difference between the two, I mean, we value them similarly throughout the offseason. So now that we don't have Chase, I mean, Higgins should slide into that role like fairly easily. It's just, what do the ancillary players do? What does Hayden Hurst do? Tyler Boyd do, or whatever? But for Nuke Hopkins specifically, I would lean him over Raheem Mostert. I was actually very surprised and slightly encouraged, like by Cliff Kingsbury's like offensive game plan for Nuke coming back, because we saw him being moved around to both sides of the field. We saw him being moved into the slot. He had more routes out of the slot than Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch like this past week. So I'll give it. I mean, I was actually encouraged like by the fact that, I mean, they were able to actually get their best player the ball, which seems like such a simple concept for us people that don't actually coach or play in the NFL, but they actually did it. Like they actually did it for the first time. And they did it in a creative way that it wasn't just some stagnant, we're just going to line up DeAndre Hopkins on the left side of the field because that's the only side that we can figure out a way to get him passes for it, like all this other stuff. So no, I do think that Hopkins is the better option, like out of that group.
And there'll be a postscript question before we sign off on this one. But I think you hit on the most important point, which is I think it was 27 snaps or 27 routes out of the slot for Hopkins. And this was one where Blake Murphy, who was one of my go-to guys as far as if I want to know what's going on with the team, I asked Blake.
Oh, beat reporting. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. And he was reporting back in the summer that they were using Hopkins more out of the slot in practice and training camp, and that's low hanging fruit. That line, what do you have last week, like 10 for 103 or something like that,
right?
I think you're looking at that as his baseline going forward, and that was in a game that Arizona was in the lead. Now what happens when Arizona is behind and they're passing more in the second half? What kind of numbers can he rack up? And the Penguin Master had a question here: trade AJ Brown straight up for Nuke Hopkins, would you do it?
I don't think so. But I want to, but I don't think so. I think the big game for AJ Brown is coming, but that's just like a gut feel at this point. But and the concerns about like Eagles in the second half, like all this other stuff. I mean, yeah, I get it. But like AJ Brown, like what we've seen so far in terms of his target share and what he's been able to do after the catch, ability to win all 3 levels of the field. Like I understand the hesitation, but it's just I still want to believe in AJ Brown.
Yeah, I think you're right that if we're just talking about the players in a vacuum, there's not a question that you want AJ Brown. Where this becomes a little more complicated is Jalen Hurts, while he did get off to a hot passing start, I do think, just like we saw last year, not as dramatic, that you want them passing the ball 25 times a game, 28 times a game, and they have a good enough defense to ensure that that's what's the game plan is going to be. Whereas Kyler Murray is going to get into some 40+ pass attempt games. But then there's also the uncertainty of, is this really, is it just going to be lots of layups to Nuke Hopkins? It makes sense. They won when they went that way. Now, what I want to highlight in talking about this is we're in a window right now where it was just one game. So, Nuke Hopkins, his role and his production last week was worth a first-round pick in fantasy football, or a top 15, top 18 pick. Nobody has him valued at that right now.
Right.
And I think on the flip side with A.J. Brown, I wonder, unless it still remains a highly, highly efficient pass offense, which it could, that we're going to go back to, out of Brown and Smith and Goddard, maybe 2 out of 3 every week. And we'll see. But with A.J. Brown, like you said, the scary thing about trading him away is that chance that he can make your week on one play. And we'll see. We'll see what happens in the battle, Pennsylvania. Before I sign off real quick, any players that are frustrating you, or when you're setting your lineups this morning, Chris, you were wondering about, other than leaving every Denver Bronco on your bench?
Right. Yeah. No, I think most of my consternation was from the Thursday night game, because I could not for the life of me figure out whether or not I should have started Rashad Bateman. I was definitely on that train of like advocating for Bateman coming back after he had that full practice like on Wednesday. But just to see, I mean, we can't predict injuries. It was just tough to watch. And it was tough to watch like the Ravens offense for the most part, like on third downs. But I was hoping to see more Bateman out there, but I understand like injuries suck, and it just makes it harder for us from a fantasy standpoint to have to watch something like that.
Yeah, Bateman and Andrews both coming in banged up and leave the game early. But then you see Devin Duvernay getting those carries. You see Isaiah Likely, Demarcus Robinson. You also see just the offensive identity for the Ravens week to week. And I get it. You want to tailor your offense to the opponent. And they won. They won both games. So going run heavy, 44 runs to 16 passes in week 7. And then I think 18 plays into Thursday night, they had 15 passes and 3 runs. And Gus Edwards is banged up. So we'll see what happens in the Superdome Monday night. We'll see what happens to everyone's matchups today. Thanks, folks, always for your loyalty, for your precious time and attention you give us every week, for being part of the Football Guys community, part of the fantasy football community. It's wonderful, fantastic to get to serve you. And unless you have ESPN Plus, I guess we weren't really missing anything with the game this morning. Russell Wilson did have a drive that ended with a Jerry Jeudy touchdown catch, and Travis Etienne is almost over 100 yards, and there's a minute left in the first half. So Etienne is going to be leading a lot of teams, if he can stay healthy, I don't want to bloom him, to victories as that value matured. You just need to have some patience. Y'all are always wonderful to be with because you're so patient and so classy.